You have 40 years and 7 Star Trek. Today on Trekland Tuesdays Live with me, Dr. Trekler Nemecek, coming at you from the heart of Trekland through Portal 47 for the big picture, sanity and clarity in all things Star Trek. Thank you for joining with us for another Tuesday. And if you are new to us on a Tuesday, then buckle up. I'm going to get off on this tangent, on this rant, or on a soapbox. It doesn't have to be ranty. I don't try to add to the toxicity of the tubes, as you know. I edit this down for the YouTubers live afterwards. And hey, if you are on YouTube later, try to watch us live sometime on a Tuesday, okay? Look, my brain blew up over the weekend because I had competing themes this week. And sometimes when you have an A story and a B story, they both wind up being weak. But this time, last night, it blew my mind. I wanted to talk about 40 years and I wanted to talk about 7 years. And somewhere along the way, I finally did the math and realized that was a perfect Star Trek topic. And why not use them both in the title, wherever you're seeing it? You have 40 years and 7 years, Star Trek. The 40 years, you may guess what I'm talking about. Happy 40th anniversary last week to, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. Or Star Trek, The Vengeance of Khan, as it might have been called if it hadn't been do-si-doing in the same year as The Vengeance of the Jedi, right? It wound up being called The Wrath of Khan so that other people might work on delayed documentaries about insane events like the Khan of Wrath. I mean, there was a lot of pontificating, a lot of nostalgia. Hey, there are movie showings now and coming up. It's going to be a topic all summer long. We can't help but watch the anniversary. Were you there in the theater? Do you have a theater memory moment? Or did you come to the Wrath of Khan somewhere along the 56 years of Star Trek that we're into? Wait, 56? It's funny. This anniversary made me sit and think for the first time. I have all kinds of memories about the motion picture and how I didn't get to see it on opening day and I had to wait a day, and how it, unlike Star Wars in my neck of the woods in Oklahoma, it was on its opening day. I remember the original, now, never again, but the original Star Wars, we didn't have it for like another week. My first day to see Star Wars was like June 5th or 6th or something. So I don't have the May, whatever, 27th anniversary in my head for the original. And I mean Star Wars. The movie I saw said Star Wars on the screen. No bloody A, B, C, D or reimagined director's edition. I have so much a memory of motion picture. Wrath of Khan, I don't. I don't know if it's because the novels came out a week ahead and yes, reading the novel is where I teared up. Not at Spock dying, but when Kirk says, his was the most human. I teared up at that. And I specifically remember what it was done. I was laying down on my mom's couch, reading it like this. And that's when it happened. I have lots of memories of the book, though. So the novel, I was prepared for the plot. And you know what? Look, the death of Spock was spoiled forever. We had I've shared this on Portal 47. I may have shared it here. The death, Gene leaked the death because he was vehemently opposed to killing off Spock, even though that's what Leonard wanted to do at the time. He had leaked it so that fandom would be up in arms, and a lot of people were. And this is pre-internet, kids. This is pre-socials. This is pre-everything. All we had were paper and stamps and newsletters and word of mouth at cons. But that was enough to lead some fans who were in professional marketing to do an actual professionally mandated, a structured marketing survey about how much Star Trek fans opposed to killing off Spock would cost the movie in boycotted box office lost revenue, in lost revenue for action figures and books and albums and the whole bit, magazines, the whole 9 yards of merchandising. And they published it in the New York Times, I want to say. It was a big thing, big hit to the publicity. It's just a testament to the movie of how that was all blown away. Nobody 1 week later, nobody had a clue. It became a footnote to history, an awesome footnote, especially as we've gone along. But nobody at the time remembered all that bluster. It was going to be like a third of the box office was going to be harmed by killing off Spock. Of course, the biggest thing was by the time they got to that point, they already knew that it was a mistake. Leonard knew it was a mistake. How do you restructure? How do you do? Well, we have the famous coffin scene, the famous torpedo scene in Golden Gate Park. they had time to film the remember scene with McCoy. So by the time, I mean, I had read the novel, yeah, but we already knew. It was just a matter of what was going to happen. And the fact that they were preloading the seeds of the comeback, Nick Meyer adamantly opposed. He thought it destroyed the integrity of the movie. How do you get emotionally involved in the death if it's a cheat? If you already know it's a cheat, if it's sequelitis. He realizes now that it was sci-fi and it was for the good of the franchise, the good of the character, and it was the smartest thing ever done. Why lose Spock in 1982? Would Star Trek have gone on without him? It certainly wasn't going to be Zahn on the cover of Newsweek in 1986. So my memories of the actual going to see the movie that night, I know we saw it at the Satellite Twin in Norman, where all the blockbusters were, where you had to go up the stairs to a little upstairs twin theater in a strip mall on the edge of campus at OU that had, you know, the game arcade and some Greek shops and a couple of restaurants, and you would always have your drinks at Mr. Bill's and eat and then come out and watch the line and go. I have all of that, but that blends into everything that we saw there. All the Star Wars and Indies and Star Treks. Maybe somewhere I have my ticket stub and I need to dig those out, but I can't remember who I actually saw it at opening night, as opposed to motion picture. And then after that, the specialness was just, it's just blurry for all of them. 3 and 4 and 5. But I remember my takeaways. I didn't like the brassy, militaristic Reagan era uniforms that the maroons, not so much the maroons, which were patterned so they could fit all those bodies as they aged. Blunt truth, all the bling. I just thought, oh God. And the Admiral on the bridge, I was like, oh God, look who's Gene's lost control of his show. And the Amazing Grace, I felt exactly the way that now I know Gene did, because we have a memo that someday we'll use in the Trek Files, where he was adamantly opposed to Amazing Grace. It was very non-secular 300 years from now. Of course, that's one of the most poignant moments of the film for a 1982 audience or for a 2022 audience. No, I had a crush on Kirstie Alley in the day. I love Dee's line as McCoy, "We will." And to find out later on that was his suggestion on stage, just yay, Dee. You know, everything. It was great to see this Enterprise take hits. It actually had the visual effects budget to be able to be shot and carved up, to have all the action sequences that they'd always been cheaped out on. And the characters, and I didn't like some of the trite, pawns in the military felt a little on the nose. 1982, all of that. But to find out that Boy Scouts was still a concept 300 years from now. But other than that, I don't know what that Admiral was smoking when he looked at Kirk and said, "You've always stood for order and following the rules." Whose dumbed down mass recordings of Kirk adventures was he watching all those years? But no, the bottom line was what the reviewer said, I believe the New York Times. Started off the review, as much as we had all loved and waited and waited and waited and loved and waited and waited and paid tickets and tried to run up the score and box office to at least halfway match Star Wars for the motion picture. The reaction for Wrath of Khan, which started off as a TV movie scale budget, remember, it totally exceeded the sum of its parts, and then convinced Leonard that he was making a mistake by leaving this franchise. But the opening line of that review, now that's more like it. And we were off and running. It feels like the soundtrack from Star Trek 4 in the hospital. Kind of the romp music. That's the way it felt as soon as Wrath of Khan opened. And of course, that's the optimism that went into Houston the weekend of the Con of Wrath, which was averted and saved from disaster. At least a PR disaster far beyond the shores of Houston. And Harv Bennett, for all the yays and nays about him, was the one that stepped in and did that. But as much as the motion picture realigned, turned the battleship of pop culture, so did the Wrath of Khan, each in their own weirdly opposing ways, and set the stage for the trilogy and the comeback on TV by the time of 86 and everything that we know today. So it's weird how it's like when a couple get married and then divorced and one of their kids becomes one of the greatest people the world has ever known. Maybe they had their faults and maybe they had their bumpy ride, but the product they've yielded has kind of been amazing. That's a very weird take that just popped into my head. 40 years. And here's the thing. I have no memory of seeing it in the theater, except that I did, obviously. And I remember my initial reaction. So I think I had them in a Facebook post or something this week. So what about you? Those of you who remembered watching it later on, I saw it at my uncle's house on a VHS tape for the, those kind of memories. And I also remember being disappointed that it was a Klingon in the neutral zone, not a Romulan, because they were near Gamma Hydra. And why would they have a Klingon? And I thought, oh, Klingons are more commercial than Romulans. Oh, boy, was I getting a glimpse of the future then. Oh, Klingons are sexier and more commercial than Romulans are. Okay, fine. And then to find out a whole generation saw that and thought there was a Klingon neutral zone when it was the Organian neutral zone, and that was only on Franz Joseph. And why was there a neutral zone when the Federation and Klingons were open to competing on planets, supposedly on the Organians, but we know that went away. But if they're going to compete for a planet inside the zone, then how can it be close to both sides, a la the Romulan neutral zone was a total trigger wire, like the neutral zone, the demilitarized zone at the Koreas. No one sets foot in it. If they do, alarms go off. That's not the nature of the border along the. It's like a demilitarized. That's why I was so proud that they had the DMZ for Cardassia and the Federation, the demilitarized zone there. Very Vietnam era term. But anyway, I remember kind of rolling my head. And then years later, an early case of canon smoothing. I thought, oh, come on, Larry, in what would have thought to be later hashtag texture not trivia, it's a Klingon because that's how rogue they were. That's how bizarre it was. That's why it's such a puzzle for the cadets. It's not according to the script. What is a Klingon doing in the neutral zone? Gamma Hydra, kids. Gamma Hydra. Gamma Hydra is the star. It's okay, fine. Of course, then the binary stars. That's four stars, by the way. Binary stars. A binary star is 2, so binary plural would be 4. They got carried away with the whole Gamma Hydra thing as well. And now we have to chalk it up to us. But they insist on having the binary stars down on the hot border, not on the back end border. So we get to say it was a sensor glitch that said 12 light years, maybe not 112. My takeaways from the Wrath of Khan. Obviously, I was focused in on not the big picture. Although, of course, we all love the big picture. All love the big picture. Who doesn't love? He's still alive as long as we have him in our hearts. He's still in our hearts as long as we remember him. I'm butchering the line, but you know what I mean. And of course, the death scene at the door. And you just can't top that. 40 years. 40 years. That was your 40 years. But I started this week wanting to talk about 7 years. 7 years. And it only struck me today that 7 years is a Pon farr cycle, which just adds to my point. I am loving, because I realize our work is never done, I'm loving the reaction of fandom this week to, Amok time, Amok Spock. Well, fandom reaction to Amok time, too. Amok Spock. And how many fans are looking at the entire show, the entire series format, especially this episode now on top of everything. And somewhere the memo didn't flash enough, I guess, that the creators themselves have parsed out that this show takes place in 2259. Not just so it can be about a year after the events of Pike and his experience on the Discovery. Classified, although it's slowly leaking out. Did you notice? Now the entire Federation Council knows about the Discovery. Is that they know about Discovery going into the future? Do they know about Discovery and its spore drive? I mean, are those linked, or is one cut off from the other? Are the people who are being let in, like April now, are they being told about the spore drive, or just the fact that Discovery was not lost in battle? It zipped into the future to an unknown fate. Lost. Enough to wear your Discovery pin on Remembrance Day. But I see a lot of fans forget that it's 2259, or in a broader sense, that we are 7 years before first season original series. We have 7 years before that time. Now, it's 6 years before Where No Man's Gone Before, which affects a lot of things. And I've talked here about the canon gaps, the timeline gaps that we have to fill in a good way. All these characters, especially the legacy characters, and even things like La'an and her run-in with the Gorn, we have 7 years, not to fix things, but to very logically play things out. These characters are not static. They're not frozen so they can... One of the weirdest things of all is the fact that Data had 30 years of existence after the crew that found him before we see him in 2364 in Farpoint. What did he do for 30 years? I mean, yes, he went through the academy. Okay, chalk up 6 years for that. Academy and some command graduate school. But still, going through the academy and then 24 years after that, say, rounding, he didn't start on his journey to humanity until he met Picard and Riker and Deanna and Geordi and Worf and Pulaski. Nothing triggered him until then. Okay, that's 30 years. It seems odd now, and most people don't care until you actually stop to think about these things. Someday there'll be a series. Someday we'll have the Stargazer original series, and we'll watch the Stargazer cross paths with somebody will say it for me, and we'll see young Data being very robotic and just unchanging. He'll look like a synth from Picard, a non-abusive one, a deranged one. So this is not 30 years. This is 7 years, and 30 years was a crazy mistake to have set his backstory that far ahead. I mean, it was a story need in the moment, I know, but it's 7 years. Lots happens in 7 years, especially apparently with these characters. I was glad to see a lot of people talking about Chapel, this whole thing about Spock and T'Pring and Chapel and Pike and Number One versus Kirk and McCoy. And yeah, this is the living embodiment of Texture Not Trivia. You've got people are upset that Chapel is seeing T'Pring. Okay, Number One. And I did it because I was like, surely not. Okay, Number One, I don't mean Una-Chin Riley. I mean, point one, the only time anyone on the bridge on the ship sees T'Pring in Amok time is when Spock chooses to reveal her and take the message on the bridge in front of God, Kalis, and everybody. Uhura says, she's lovely, Mr. Spock. Who is she? That's her first time to see T'Pring. And then Chapel, who runs on just to give McCoy his med kit to beam down with. Chapel runs on, who's already into her crush, runs on and is standing there when Spock says, that lieutenant is my wife, or she lieutenant is my wife. That's all he says. There's reaction shots all around, and the next thing we know, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy are beaming down to Vulcan after the commercial break. You see Chapel go at Spock. Now, for 50-something years, we've all interpreted that as everybody being in shock that Spock has a wife, has a significant other of any kind. We can now parse it to say that, okay, Christine knew about T'Pring. She probably knew that they were engaged at one time and that now they've been estranged. Chapel would not go after Spock in 2266 and 67 if she knew anything about that he and T'Pring were actually still connected. And not just connected, but for him to say the W word, the wife. And that's from now on, that's how we interpret that look. Wait, what? When did you get married? You've never mentioned this. You never said, no, Miss Chapel, I'm married. What kind of a cat are you, sir? And not to forget, we've got Chapel and her whole Roger Corby odyssey. And this is where 7 years is so much. By the way, Vulcans do not have sex only every 7 years. They have to have sex every 7 years. They are free, as we have seen, to go do the la-la anytime they want to, if they care to. It's just that it's a biological imperative every 7 years, like salmon swimming upstream. But I think we got that settled in the 80s or 90s. People are a little misguided. That's why it was such an issue for Tuvok, stuck in the Delta Quadrant. Chapel has had time to already have feelings for Spock that as a good person she has suppressed, and also as a loosey-goosey, can't have relationships, can't have commitments person. She's just going to feel those flutters and deal with it. But she has 7 years to watch Spock and T'Pring. We have 7 years to enjoy the coming story. And don't you doubt that that's what the coming story is going to be about. And yeah, it will be a tragedy to see this couple starting at the place where they are and already having issues about careers and reconciling things across space. So don't tell me about family ships by the 24th century. Don't tell me about that at all. This is exactly why, only we're seeing it through a Vulcan lens. But we've got 7 years of Star Trek time to tell the story of what happens to them and enjoy it along the way. And we're not in a hurry to get there. We just saw a hysterical episode, low-key droll, and they're back together by the end of it. This is not the beginning of the long road, but you just see the seeds planted. But if Chapel as some people are opposing or upset about, already has a little flirting, and it's so obvious, or at least pick up on it, and it bugs her a little bit because it's weird. We know that she's going to be fighting and be torn by that. And at some point, either through a deflection or a reflection, wind up with Roger Corby and be infatuated with him, or be on the rebound with him. And then what? She's back on the Enterprise and rebounding Corby with Spock. By the time of the motion picture, she's glad to see him, but that's all gone. Thank goodness. 11 years is long enough. 11 years of real time, much less 2 or 3 years of Trek time, was enough to dilute Chapel's character on that front. And sad to say, for Majel taking away the Spock crush, yeah, she was the bottom of the totem pole on the call sheet order. And it was so rare that she got to do anything. Now, I see everybody pointing to a obsession, a couple of them. No one brings up she gets ice cream for the kids, but off of Triacus. But no one brings up the Return to Tomorrow scenario, where she is the one that hosts Sargon's body and saves the day at the end by subduing Hinoch. Chapel is the one that does that. Now, you might say, well, it's Sargon in Chapel's body, but she's got to be cooperative. To me, that's like the high point of Chapel's daring doing. Of course, until the animated series, when she gets to take charge, when she's right there with Uhura saving the ship. All of that's there. And people who can't reckon, they see the Strange New Worlds Chapel is different from, even from Majel's original series Chapel, and even giving the fact of where Chapel was on the call sheet and what they're bound and determined to do with Chapel here. They're not irreconcilable. We just didn't see Chapel in her off hours. We just didn't have that glimpse, that camera feed. Everybody likes her enough. McCoy calls her Christine. They're good enough friends. But that's another thing. McCoy's not just the next doctor after M'Benga. M'Benga is back on the ship he's not CMO. We don't know how many people he treats, if he's only there for Spock or what. You would think that limited space would mean he would do any medical duties he needed to be, but he was there to help McCoy with Spock by the time of the second season, and some of these close calls. And for the fact that apparently the Vulcan database in Starfleet, the medical database especially, is still woefully incomplete. What is up with that? Don't ever rag on Sarek being bizarre, because the entire Vulcan civilization is bizarre that way. I digress. There's something going on with M'Benga and Chapel and McCoy and the whole what's going on in sickbay. I'm also looking forward, as we've said, to seeing what happens to M'Benga. And where does Mark Piper come in 6 years? Is M'Benga doing something with his daughter? Does something else happen that leads him to resign or take a long-term leave? Something's going to happen. And you can bet this gang, Henry Alonzo Myers and Davy Perez, and on down the list. I'm blanking on the rest of the writers, but they're all confirmed Trek fans, original series fans. Akiva Goldsman has already been in a Twitter feed where someone said, hey, what about Roger Corby? And he said, stay tuned. So kids, this ain't 2017. This is the Trek that the world has been waiting for. The 7 years thing, 7 years to play with all of this and the whole nature of T'Pring. Yeah, Pike and number one know all about T'Pring, but not Kirk, not McCoy. What happens to Spock and T'Pring that leads him to shut down, that leads them to go their separate ways in all but the paperwork by the time of Amok time? What leads him to decide to shut down his personal life and not share it with Kirk or McCoy or Scotty or Sulu or anybody else who was around later on, who was on the bridge and shocked at T'Pring, including the two he takes down with him? They don't know the backstory, and Spock gets to tell it. And why Spock uses the word wife, maybe that's the simplest thing he can say, because she technically is his wife. They just need a ceremony to make it official. They're still bonded from childhood, maybe slightly different than the Betazoid way. Everything he did for his earlier Pike days, he's decided to do the opposite with his later family, who was shocked that he would hijack the ship to go save Pike in Menagerie. See how this is? And none of this is overnight. None of this is it happens 1 week and then it's forgotten the next. You have 7 years. 7 years for Chapel and T'Pring and Spock and Pike and M'Benga and La'an and the Gorn. We have 7 years for all of this to play out. I'm just saying. So the fact that this week we had 40 years and 7 years, I just thought that was too good to resist. So yes, when you see any Trek fans complaining, distraught, loving the show, but upset about some of the timelines of the characters, the legacy characters, it's okay. It's okay. You have 7 years, Star Trek, and you had 40 good ones too. All right. Got that off my chest. Did I leave anybody out of the cast? You've got 7 years to play with. Oh, Uhura, if you notice, was nowhere near the T'Pring drama. Uhura was stuck in the negotiations room, translating for Pike and Spock. Her time with T'Pring has been kept asunder so far. She can still be surprised on the bridge in Amok time. Does this mean that the rest of the cast will never see T'Pring live? Will this mean that there's always some convolution to keep Uhura away from T'Pring? Does this mean that our young Mr. Kyle now isn't the same Kyle as the Kyle that's later? Now I want to go back and check who was beaming who in Spock Amok, or it's none of his business. But then again, Kyle isn't on the bridge to have a reaction of shock in Amok time. So mission solved on that one. No, I think of all the legacy characters, we're good. And the whole thing about George Samuel Sam Kirk, I mean, give it up, people. Kirk says, I'm the only one that called him Sam, which is pretty much true. That's going to be an interesting triangle. And when the Kirk does come in of the second season, twinkle in my eye, it'll be interesting to see what the triangle is. Because this George Samuel Kirk obviously walked up and touched the big egg when he should have known better. At least he didn't pull his glove off and go up and touch it. But he's a risk taker. That must run in the family. I don't know. We'll see. We'll also see what drove him out of Starfleet. He has 7 years to leave Starfleet and go into civilian service and get married. How old is Peter? Is Peter 10? Is Peter 12? Peter's born by now. You would think, if you're under standard 20th century morality there, that George Samuel Kirk and Aurelin are married and Peter has been born. Or is Peter a year away? He looks older than 7. Don't you think Craig Hundley looks older than 7? But something happens. Maybe he simply leaves Starfleet to be home and close to his family. Again, that's all yet to come. The naming thing, Chris Pike can call anybody whoever the hell he wants to. And if someone's saying George Samuel Kirk and Kirk's instant reaction, talking to an android, isn't only I call him Sam, that's just familial memory muscle. It's all good, kids. It's all good. You have 7 years, Star Trek. Now I think we've covered everybody, and now let's move on with it. Hey, listen, I want to thank everybody for being here, but I do need to remind everyone going to Vegas, if you haven't thought about it, the day before, Geek Nation Tours and I are doing we've done this several times before, but maybe you're new to it, and there has been a pandemic, the one-day tour out to the Valley of Fire and some other interesting Star Trek-related stuff. You will be shocked, amazed, and surprised. There's a lunch involved. It's an hour away, up to 15 from Vegas. We leave at 7 a.m. because it's friggin' August, and we get back about 2. So you've got plenty of Con Eve nighttime time to recuperate. But we have a great time. This doesn't do it justice with the groups we've taken out to the Killer Bridge, much less Silica Dome here. That's happening, geeknationtours.com, or you can go to my website, LarryNemecek.com, and see the link where you can also see the link for the Great Bird Origins Tour in August to close the Gene Roddenberry centennial year. Good thing, since we couldn't do it last year as we'd planned. It's 2 days in LA, going to the life locations as a child, as an adult, as a career person for Gene Roddenberry. And Rod joining us for part of that, and some other surprises still to come. I need 6 people minimum. I've got 4. You might think about it, and it's the weekend before Trek Vegas and the Valley of Fire one day. Other than that, of course, I want to say a shout out to all of our Patreon folks, our TTL Club. I'm talking about Diana Hopkins, Robin Wilson, Lawrence Todd, Anne-Marie Siegel, Keith Rombach, Justin Porteous, Nathaniel Robinson, and Blaze K. And our live wires, Rusty Harold, Halbert Gunn Johnson, Robert McLean, Alan Owensi, J.R. Poole, Byron Bailey, Dave Gregory, Gay Cleven Yunstrom, and Casey Shafsky. Really, really want to thank you guys. If you're interested in helping out the live stream expand, and we're about to make another push here in just a few weeks, it's $5 and $10. It's simple. It's low key. for a shout out and for access to our older Portal 47 interviews. That's coming. Patreon.com/Trekland Live. Easy peasy. And of course, being a Tuesday, the new edition of the Trek Files is out with none other than the writer of the Tholian Web herself. Co-writer, technically, but she was the real writer. Judy Burns. Judy Burns, who is still very much with us here in Southern California and teaching. She was very young when she sold the script. She tells the story and what went into it and what it was like working with Gene. And well, not Gene Kuhn, but Bob Justman and Freddie Freiberger, someone who has a good word for Fred Freiberger. I know if you're not tuned into your season 3 original series, we'll get you there on the Trek Files on Facebook. The documents are there related to her story and sale, of course, but podcast.roddenberry.com. So many Roddenberry different podcasts now, besides Trek Files and even Mission Log. You should check it out. Sci-Fi 5 is a daily little 5-minute moment in sci-fi history across all sci-fi. I appreciate all of our Trekophiles out there spelled with an F. Otherwise, you can get me at Larry Nemecek on Twitter, Bang, and everywhere else, including where you're watching right now, Larry Nemecek's Trekland, unless you're on Twitch, and we're changing that soon. Larry Nemecek's Trekland, please like and subscribe us on YouTube. I got into that late, so appreciate all the help you can get us there, getting our numbers up. Other than that, kids, I'm going to take off. If you're leaving us for now, let me just leave you with this. Stay healthy. Do all the things. Just stay smart. This virus hasn't gone away. And we're hoping it's riding down. We're going ahead with life. But that doesn't preclude you from taking some basic smart precautions, okay? Stay woke. Check the sources. Oh, my God, we're heading into election season. Make sure what you're actually reading is correct. And then be open to it if it is. As always, I'm saying, trek well, everybody.